So I appreciate that invitation. I actually appreciate the invitation to be here. I really do love my PrimeKey brethren. They've been out there preaching the gospel of PKI, the same as I, for a long, long time. I've been doing PKI for over 25 years. I've implemented DarkMatter. Technically, could be classified as a commercial CA. It's probably number 4 commercial CA that I have been at. I have the privilege of being responsible for getting it off the ground. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those experiences today and what they mean. And I've had lots of interactions and the pleasure of implementing public key infrastructure for governments, for enterprises, for industries over the period of many years. And I intend to share some of those experiences with you. But I think the main thing that I want to convey at this point is this is really just the beginning of a conversation. I think that as an industry, as people who are interested and focused on securing one of the greatest assets that we have in the information that allows business to be conducted and wealth to be created, it needs to be secured, and always security seems to be a flavor of the conversations that we are having. But there are a lot of other elements that need to go into the pieces that we are putting together to enable business to happen. So, we are in the information age. Throughout time, there's been different ages, and age is typically just a collection of years where there is some grouping and focus on, what humanity as a whole is creating. We start back in the Stone Ages, where, that's where speech was basically produced, which enabled two entities to be able to communicate and begin to do stuff together. You move on to a Bronze Age, and you're getting a little more technology introduced to the society, and we begin to see things like writing, mostly via glyphs, etc., being created. And then you move on a little further into the Iron Age. You have a little more technology in the way in which society operates or is based on. And you start to have language and literature and creating an environment where even better interactions or more advanced interactions can occur from a transaction perspective. Anyway, on and through history, we get to where we are now, where we are in the information age. And so what does that really mean? We are an economy that is really based on knowledge. Knowledge is the currency. That's really what we're dealing with. If you take a look at who the standard worker is in most societies these days, in most modern societies these days, it is somebody that would be classified as a knowledge worker. They're utilizing their knowledge to actually create wealth for themselves, hopefully, or for those who they work for. And the question might also be, who else are they creating wealth for? And I think that's a question that we have to ask ourselves when we are implementing technology. So, I think many of us in this industry will be familiar with factors of authentication. We have 3 factors of authentication: something you have, something you know, something you are. You have some combination of those. You actually have a stronger assurance and trust that you're actually dealing with the entity who they claim to be or who you think they are. So it is with knowledge. There are actually different aspects to knowledge that needs to be taken into consideration. And the more of those aspects of knowledge that we can combine together, the more effective we can be in an economy, an information economy. And those, I thought it was appropriate in current environment that there would be a WWW of knowledge. And so I've defined those up there. It's what you have. These are the facts. It's typically the technology that we may be working with. It may be the data that the technology is providing access to, etc. And these are foundational, and quite often in business, that's what people are focused on. But whether you are going to be truly successful as a knowledge worker and take true advantage or maximize the advantage in the digital economy will be determined on whether you actually focus on the other two. It's not just as straightforward as the technology or the data. You also need to know why, what motivates somebody to want to have access to information. What motivates transactions to occur. What is something that someone is willing to or to give up their time or assets for. Understanding the principles that the community that you're operating in operate under. Because if you operate under an entirely separate, different principles, you'll very quickly find that you will not have trust. And trust is a key aspect of doing business. This is not my claim. This comes from a professor who says, really, if we want to deal with technology, it's not just the technology itself, but its proper management. And if we manage it properly, we can actually create wealth for nations, for enterprises, for individuals. And by wealth, I'm not talking about money. Money is just an artifact or a tool. By wealth, I mean the ability, in my mind, wealth is the ability to have time to do the things that we want to do, to be able to focus on the things that we want to. It means to have the assets necessary to accomplish the types of things that we want to do. It means being able to have time again with those that we value the most. This is wealth. So technology is key. Technology is key to creating wealth, and wealth is key to creating satisfaction in a society. Now, in that environment, in the information age, we all know that there are different types of entities. I like to think there's two different classes. Or two different perspectives, because you can't necessarily pigeonhole someone into one class or another. There's two different perspectives on what makes somebody tick. So, there are some folks who consider that there is only a pie and it's this big, and my approach to life is to get as much of that pie as possible. And to do that, I need to take advantage of my neighbour or somebody else so that I can accumulate as many assets as possible, and I get my satisfaction from realising, hey, I've been successful because look what I've accumulated, or look who I've been able to basically stand on somebody else's head to feel I've made achievement. The other group of people look as the community that we operate in a whole and think, well, how can I actually create wealth and enjoyment for everybody around me? In other words, there is not just one pie. We can create new pies and everybody can participate. For those of us that are in honest work dealing with technology, we typically fall into that latter category, where we are creating products and services that are supposed to make the lives of others better. But we all know that in order to be successful, there is another element in our society who is hell-bent on taking what it is that we're creating and still using it to create wealth. The technology still creates wealth, but they want it to create wealth for unintended parties, mostly themselves. So, I could go through a litany of challenges that we face, cyber threats that are present, that we as technologists are typically trying to combat. They are exponentially increasing. The type of actors who are involved in perpetrating attacks and taking advantage of threats are getting more complex, better funded, etc. So how do we combat that? We have to combat this to be successful. The speed at which attacks occur are increasing. It's not a matter of if you have been impacted, it's a matter of when. The time period that it takes to actually detect whether you've had a threat is getting longer, which means there's a great period of time in which the technology and tools or services that you've created are actually being used to create wealth and benefit for others other than their intended recipients. So how do we get back control of these things? The question is, how do we combat this constant attack? Because we are going to be measured in our services by our ability to be able to mitigate as much of this as possible. Now, I don't believe that it's practical. I don't believe that it's practical to be 100% secure, because I view security really as a chain and superimposed with usability. I can have the most secure system in the world at one end of that, perfect security, nobody can use it. So it's not worth a damn. At the other end of that, I can have something that is openly accessible to anybody can use it, but there's no security. And again, it's not worth a damn. Nobody wants to use it because they don't trust it. So the true art of technologists who are enabling business is to find where in that continuum you can operate so that you are mitigating a sufficient amount of these risks and threats that are present in the society and be able to control those, and then actually recognize that there is going to be a gap, that you aren't going to control them, and that you can have a plan to respond to them and find where that sweet spot is. And if you can do that, then you actually can take technology and produce services that people will trust and use, and they will be sufficiently secure to get business done. Now, that does mean you're always operating with some element of risk, and we have to accept that. We can't deal in absolutes. Governments can't solve this, enterprises can't solve this. It's going to take the combined smarts of us who are in this room and a plethora of others outside this room to do our best, to do our part, to continually have that dialogue, continually have that conversation of determining, okay, what are the risks? How can I mitigate those? How can I produce something that is going to have enough confidence that people will use it and I can actually, for some percentage of time, provide benefits for the intended audience that I'm trying to create wealth for. We all know it costs a lot. These are real figures that we're fighting. So from a wealth perspective, there are plenty of entities out there who want to take what you've created and bend that to their own purposes. They want to take your pie, they want to divide it up and not give it to who you intended it to be. So, technology enables wealth. In the information age, it enables wealth in an exponential way, but it's only if it is properly managed. It will create wealth. The question is, who is it creating wealth for? And the question that we all need to answer is, when we deploy systems, when we utilize technology, who is going to be the end beneficiary of that? Business occurs at the speed of trust. This is not my saying. I think this was probably an RSA phrase that was created a couple of years ago. But when people have confidence in the systems, that they're going to do what they expect to do, this is kind of a technology piece. That's that first bullet point there. Technology is a key aspect and enabler of trust. But the next two bullet points are elements that are related to the technology, but actually aren't the technology itself. And without those, we don't actually create trust. And without trust, you won't actually get business flowing. The information doesn't get to the individuals who need it. The benefits don't accrue to those who need it. And you are creating wealth, but not for the intended recipients. So you need to view your implementation from more than just a technology perspective. If you're here and you're focused on technology, then you are a key component of enabling business to occur and wealth to be created, but you're just one component. And we also need to realize that it is one component in an ecosystem, and we have to pay attention to what those other two are. And I'm going to go a little bit into what they are. So what is trust? This is my definition of trust. It's a confidence or assurance that a person or a system or something will behave exactly as you expect or in your best interests. Now, in the Middle East, we have a saying, trust in God, but tie your camel. So what does that really mean? I think it really means what I've actually been talking about. We are providing services in some community. If we provide our services and we expect that the community is going to behave benevolently towards us in a certain way, we might be trusting in the greater good. The sad fact of the matter is we're probably going to find out that our cookies have been stolen fairly quickly. So you can trust in the greater good of the community that you're operating in, but you actually have to take some steps to secure against that element that is also in your community that wants to take the benefits that you're creating and provide them to somebody that you didn't intend. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time about, what does it really mean to tie your camel? Doing business. We are in an information age. We're typically now not face-to-face anymore when we're doing business. Somebody's at the other end of a transaction. Whether you have assurance in what you're doing or greater faith in what you're doing will depend on how much trust or confidence you have in who is at the other end of that. And there's a lot of elements that go into making that determination. As we have moved in this information age to more and more interaction with systems, etc., the ability not only of those systems to do their job, but how they are managed and whether they actually achieve the outcome that we expect will be true indicators of whether we're successful. So again, I'm trying to reinforce the point that if we focus just on the technology, we've only taken one step out of potential 3 that we need to in order to be successful in our endeavor. So again, I've provided 3 bullet points for establishing trust. Technology is one, and the tokens are, the things that we use to interact with the technology. The policy and procedures around the implementation of the technology also have to be taken into consideration, and the relationships and responsibilities of all the parties that are participating. PKI, since we are all PKI-related technologists here, is a perfect example of this. It has everything built in. I think it's actually one of the reasons why PKI has stood the test in time. It's been around for many years, and oftentimes we've heard people crowing, 1989 is going to be the year of PKI. Okay, we got it wrong. 1991 is going to be the... and so on and so forth. The elements that are present in PKI have all of those 3 things that I spoke about, and they're naturally there. The interesting thing is, for 25 years, I have had an opportunity of coming into environments where a PKI has been deployed, and I have found only PKT. In other words, technology has been deployed, but there has been no policies and process, no thought given to how it's going to be governed, no objection mission statement about what it is we're trying to achieve being defined or being worked towards, and so you don't necessarily know the full extent of the stakeholders that you're dealing with, who is it you're trying to benefit, how you intend to do that. Interestingly enough, the people who put public key infrastructure, the I, the infrastructure, means we have all three of those pieces in place. We have the technology, we have the policy and procedures, and we have those relationships defined. All of these were defined in RSC 3647. We have a template for CP. You can use the same template for CPS. You can use the same template for an RPS. If we actually follow that and we actually document the things that we're doing, we actually are implementing this system. We are actually taking into account the other things that we need to, which aren't just the technology. As a result, not all PKIs are the same. They don't accomplish their mission, and it cannot be just because their technology wasn't good enough. It's typically because one of the two other aspects were not addressed. Now, I was working for a commercial CA back in 2011, a different commercial CA back in 2011, and there were a number of fairly public and spectacular failures in the commercial CA business. Now, they occurred not because the technology that they were using was inferior. They occurred because those guys did not follow their policies and procedures that they needed to. So they had great technology. The technology wasn't the problem. The problem was people lost faith and trust in it because they didn't pay attention to those policies and procedures that they agreed and said, this is how we operate. And then they didn't do it. And as a result, they lost trust. As a result, a lot of wealth was lost, and they actually went out of business, some of them. Some of them are still there. I don't know how they managed that, but I guess all things are possible. So there are many elements that need to go into operating the technology. I just want to... There are many different ways that we can measure a public key infrastructure, but we can do that based on the tools that should be readily available if PKI is implemented correctly. And PKI is implemented correctly if we take a look at not just securing the infrastructure, implementing the technology, the protocols that we're using, etc., but also how it's managed, who it's managed for, and how the benefits are flowing within the system. And there are lots of ways to do that, and I don't tend to go too much into that in the presentation. But as I said at the beginning, I actually intend this to be the start of a conversation, and I welcome a conversation with all of you, because really, if we are to be successful, I am a proponent, as you may have guessed, of type 2 view on life, and that is we can actually create things that are good, and if we participate together, and there's enough of us participating together with a common objective, we can actually find that sweet spot, because the only way in that security continuum that you can find that sweet spot is to actually understand the environment in which you're operating, and that takes feedback and being able to process that feedback from everyone. So I want to talk now a little bit about what DarkMatter is doing in the UAE. I went there to set up and operate the national PKI. Why do the UAE want a national PKI? UAE first created wealth for itself as a nation in the pearl trade. It used to die for pearls. And then oil was discovered, and a transition was made. They created a lot of wealth in the oil and gas industry, and still a lot of their systems are based on oil and gas. But they have actually had the foresight, the leadership in the country has had the foresight to see, you know what, this train's coming to the end of its line, and we need to be thinking about something else. They want to transition, they recognize, they want to enable the digital economy, and they want to be the provider of services in that digital economy. So in order to do that, they recognized they needed trust infrastructure in the country that was not there. So a public key infrastructure is part of their strategy. These are the things that DarkMatter is the operator. So we are setting up and operating the national PKI for the UAE. And we have basically 4 categories of services, products that we need to provide to enable trust, and a number of objectives. Now, if you go through these objectives, you will see that not many of them are really focused on technology. Now, technology is a key part for us. DarkMatter actually has labs. We have crypto development. Some really cool things are happening in other parts of the company. The business unit that I'm responsible for, the public key infrastructure, is fairly vanilla in flavour. And so not too exciting. We are trying to do as many innovative things as we can in the implementation, but it's fairly set in terms of what we need to implement, certainly from a technology perspective. But the real tricky part of the implementation is establishing those relationships that you need to in order to ensure that what you're being built will be utilised in the manner in which it was intended. And if always when we're building systems, deploying things, we keep that in mind, we are most likely to have a success at the end of the day. We won't find ourselves in the poor position of getting to the end of an implementation to find that the implementation went really, really great, but we actually just created a whole bunch of benefits for a group that we didn't intend to. We didn't get the benefit of that, or those that employed us didn't get the benefit of that, and hence we're out of a job. So, the national PKI was to enable a digital society because it can provide essential trust if it's done right. So the real thing comes down to if it's done right. It is a key component. This should be a part of every national strategy. What have we done so far? This is our journey. We're still on it. We're still moving ahead. Things aren't going as fast as I originally envisioned. And that's not because we don't have fantastic technology partners in PrimeKey. It's not because we don't have fantastic trust partners in Quavatis, because we bootstrapped the PKI by relying on routes that were already out there, getting some issuing CAs, and then we'll transition those issuing CAs to the country's own anchors. We've made good progress. We've deployed an outstanding platform that has the capability to provide services. We have very detailed policy that has been developed at the national level, and we have implemented our processes, our standard operating procedures in order to meet those policies. And so we believe that we're in a good place for operation. And now we've begun deploying credentials. Well, we've been deploying credentials actually for about 18 months, but we've more seriously opened the floodgates to deploying credentials within a government context, within commercial entities, within the UAE, etc. So now we're at that point where we are really trying to determine whether we are achieving what we set out to achieve. We did the usual things in deploying technology. We created redundancy. One of the requirements that we had was that the UAE actually wanted to have, and I think this may have been more from a mindset, but at the end of the day, the PKI that we're setting up is the PKI for the UAE. And therefore it has to operate in a way in which the community that it's intended for will trust it. And for the UAE, that meant it has to operate in country. So this was a mandate for us to operate in country. Now, one of the challenges that we have with that, we wanted to use industry best practices for deployment of data centers. One of the things that we couldn't hit, we couldn't be a tier 4. We couldn't be a tier 4 because there's only one provider of electricity distribution services in the UAE. So we can't get it from separate providers. So technically we don't meet a tier 4. We can go to different substations and different routes that it comes in, and we can implement in terms of the principles, but we can't necessarily check the boxes of what somebody else may have determined, simply because in the environment in which we're operating, that does not exist. And so, there were some of us who gathered together last night and were having a conversation about some of the industry standards that we need to meet and abide by, and how some of these standards are out of date. They're out of date and perhaps don't apply because it is a long lead time to change standards, and we are in a fast-paced moving environment. And so whilst we have to comply with standards to be able to show somebody a check mark, that is typically an exercise in gaining somebody's trust to say that you've taken a minimum set of steps. But a more accurate reflection of where you are in terms of your trust and security is not so much just to rely upon the standards and say, hey, I can check this box, but actually take practical steps to test your infrastructure, to find out whether what you have implemented is resilient to the types of attack that you expect to get. Try it. It's the best way of doing things. And this is the approach that we have taken. So I'm going to skip over the solution highlight for a minute and talk about our platform and what we did in deploying our platform. So yes, we can choose the best technology partners. Yes, we can make sure we've got the more ubiquitous list of protocols, etc., that we support, etc. And yes, via some standard, people can say, hey, you know, there's some checks and balances in place. But the true test is really to do it live. And so we have gone through a number of processes to ensure that the platform that we have deployed is actually likely to defend against those entities that we don't want to take advantage or don't want to utilize the infrastructure for the creation of their wealth. We want to ensure that what has been created is actually going to attribute success to the intended parties. It's a really good thing to do. So, some lessons learned so far in our deployment, because it's ongoing. I should state next month, by the end of next month, we should be finished our web trust for the routes that have been created in country. And then we'll be embedding them in the browser. So we've still got 1 or 2 steps to go. We just finished our ISO audits and passed those. And we've had some other industry audits that we've been through as well. And as well as our own internal testing that we've been through, it has, for us, been a case of, as we deploy, document what you expect the behavior to be, deploy, and deploying can have its own interesting set of challenges in terms of meeting mandates and metrics, etc., that are important. But then once you've done that, now test. Now test to make sure, did you really achieve what you expected to achieve? And you know, this is no different than a normal software development life cycle. We're just applying this across a whole project as well. So what are the things that we've learned? It's critical to have the right partners. More than anything else, when you're in a digital economy, you are not the whole economy. We don't control everything. So you need to make sure that you're partnered with the right enterprises, the right entity that can provide, or entities that can provide the services that you're looking for and that you need. Choosing those partners are critical. In our path to deployment, we started out with an idea of, from a technology perspective, you know, having this partner, and from a trust perspective, having this partner. And guess what? Today, we don't have that technology partner, and we don't have that trust partner. Because as we went through our process of testing, it turned out that even though they may have superior technology, or even though they may have superior deployment, those other aspects of trust, of ensuring that you have the right business relationship in place, ensuring that from a timeliness perspective, there is actually an ability for both partners to work together. You might have a partner who's perfectly suited for what you're doing, but the timing doesn't work as well. There's a lot of elements that need to go into creating a successful partnership. And there are some key aspects to what it means to have a successful partnership. You've got to start with the end in mind, but from my perspective, for this project, I realized that over time, things are going to change. the objectives, even the policies that are created at the top, are going to change over time. They should. They should, because they should be adjusted to reflect the community in which we're trying to operate, which is always changing. And so in choosing a partnership, one of the key things that you need to look for is somebody that is flexible, somebody that is easy to work with, and that, more than anything, is the most valuable aspect that you can look for in a partner. Because in the environment in which we operate, things always change. So find somebody who is flexible. If you find somebody, a lot of the monoliths, the megaliths that exist in our industry are actually failing at this point because they have become too rigid in their implementation and they can't take the little steps that they need to. They haven't remained as flexible as they need to. It's like us as people as we get older. If we don't continue to exercise, etc., and stay flexible, we end up kind of being stuck in one place on the couch, and then we deteriorate and then we die. So don't deteriorate, don't die. Find a partner who's flexible. The other thing that's interesting is everything takes longer than you think. And I'm pretty generous when I'm planning out something and think, wow, if it's going to take this long, then it's going to take twice as long. And I try to work in as much buffer as possible. But sometimes you don't have that capability, especially if you're dealing with a zero-day incident that is impacting your infrastructure and you need to respond to it now. Always try to plan in as much time as possible and always be checking where you are, validating whether you're actually making progress. A very smart person, I think he was the Secretary for Agriculture, actually, for the United States. He said, when performance is measured, performance improves. When performance is measured and reported, the rate of improvement accelerates. And I think all of us want accelerated improvement in delivering of our services, so it's important to measure things and report them and track them. It's a boring thing. It's something that I hate doing. So one of the first things that I did was hire a project manager who I can task all those things to keep me informed so that I'm getting the right set of information and as we're moving forward, and we can adjust accordingly. It's great to be able to have some window to plan, to respond to something that you see or you may have anticipated as coming. And you can find those things if you're actually keeping track of what's happening in your deployment. If you're always responding to something, it's really difficult to get things right first time. Give yourself as much time as possible by planning ahead and tracking everything that you're doing. The other thing that's interesting is people. People is the key to success. Having the right people with the right experience and the right attitude. In fact, attitude is more important than anything. It doesn't matter if you've got the most spectacularly brilliant expertise at some particular technology, because that information can be learned, it can be gained, it typically exists in the ether and is available for people to apply. It really comes down to those who have the right attitude about the knowledge that they have. The most important people in your organization are not those who know the most, because in our environment, we pretty much can get access to that knowledge. It's those who know how to apply it and have the right attitude in doing so. Before going to the UAE, I spent about 17 years in the US. My first job in the US, I was working for Cisco in their Technical Assistance Center. And in the Cisco TAC, Salt Lake TAC, that was the organization. Cisco in those days typically bought about 6 or 7 companies a year and then assimilated them into the company, and those products had to get supported by the Technical Assistance Center. Salt Lake TAC was the one that got that job to do that, of all the new products coming in. And the reason why Salt Lake got that is because San Jose sure as hell didn't want the new stuff. They wanted Salt Lake TAC to make all the mistakes on it, figure out how to do it, and then when everything was settled and things are in place, then you transfer it to San Jose and they get nice satisfaction scores from their customers because they know how to support it. So we had a challenge, and we were bringing on lots of new technology, or Cisco was bringing on lots of new technology in how to support this. And there were a number of people when I first got there, it was about maybe 45, 50 folks there are other divisions of Cisco there, but in the TAC, there's only about 45 or 50 people. And based on the expectation of technologies that were being brought in over the next month or two, we needed to ramp up, and we did. We ramped up to about 120 engineers supporting out of Salt Lake. And when we were hiring for that, we were fortunate that we were in a market where we had individuals that were relatively educated, skilled, could speak different languages, worked out great. Salt Lake's a great place for that. But just about nobody obviously had any expertise on the things that we were going to be supporting. And so when we were looking to hire for that, you can't go out there and look at somebody's resume and say, who has the most knowledge about this? Because that basically didn't exist in the market. What we had to do was make a determination of who has the best attitude and can demonstrate a capability and willingness to learn what they need to fill this job. That was how we hired things. And I have applied that same process at DarkMatter in the UAE. Same reason. I'm looking for somebody who has the willingness to learn, and this is who we should look to add to our team. Because an interesting thing happened, and I learnt some lessons from the Cisco TAC in Salt Lake. We brought on a bunch of people. I actually mandated that 25% of everyone in the TAC's time was to be spent on training. So into a lab, we created a Cisco Excellence, Lab of Excellence, whatever they called it in those days. Maybe they still call that there. But, and everybody had to spend 25% of their time in there, break, fix, so that whenever they're on the phone, they'd already known the issue that they're dealing with. And training was a big part of what they're doing and learning. Now, some interesting thing happened when we did that. The satisfaction scores of Cisco customers who were dealing with Salt Lake TAC basically doubled. It went from something that was really, really crappy to something that was almost perfect in a matter of months. And that was really amazing. The other interesting thing that happened was those 45 or 50 folks who had been in the TAC for a long time, some of the more experienced folks came to me and said, oh, look, we don't think this is fair because these new guys that you've brought on, they've only been here a couple of months and, you know, they're already getting paid as much as me, and I've been here 5 years. Now, the way that remuneration worked, or the way that we designed remuneration work, was we set a set of metrics. You say, you meet these key performance indicators, you meet these performance indicators, you will be in this band of remuneration. And it gave people a motivation. Meet those metrics, move to the next one. Meet those metrics, move to the next one. And some of these guys that came in did that really, really quickly. And so very quickly were getting remunerated as well as those that had been there for 5 years, because the guys that had been there for 5 years generally tended to do the same things that they'd always been doing. Generally were not really enthusiastic about going into the lab and doing the break fix. Generally were not necessarily enthusiastic about learning new skills. And so I had to explain to a number of those that, you know, years of working in the organization was not the metric that we're measuring people on. Because, you know, that individual who'd been there for 5 years basically had about 1 year worth of experience based on the metrics that were coming out in the testing that we're doing. They had 1 year 5 times over. In other words, they weren't progressing. So I really just had somebody who was really a 1 year experienced employee. The fact that they'd been there 5 years was not the indicator of the benefit they're given to the company. So finding the right set of metrics and being able to measure that is important, and motivating people, finding people who want to improve, who want to add, is a key aspect to being successful. Balance is always required. So it's never black and white. There's never right and wrong. There's always grey areas, and judgment calls need to be made. And finding that right balance of implementing technologies and processes versus usability is key to being a success, because at the end of the day, you've got to keep in mind who it is that you're actually providing the services for. For me, I drive a pickup truck. I drive a pickup truck because I'm a fairly utilitarian person. My tool has to be able to do something for me. I'm not so interested in how shiny something is. I'm interested in actually what it can do. And if we measure things correctly and we balance things correctly, we focus on the things that are important to us, then they will actually deliver the benefits that we expect. So I don't want the shiniest car on the lot. I do want something that's capable of carrying the things that I need to carry from point A to point B. That's the thing that returns benefit to me. That's the thing that's important. So I need to balance what it is I'm looking for in a tool, and in this instance a car, that can actually provide the benefits that I'm looking for. So finally, on trust. Again, business moves at the speed of trust, and trust will be enabled if you have the appropriate framework in place. And a framework, technology is a key part, but it's not everything. And in fact, if we just focus on the technology, you might end up turning out a nice, shiny, bright car, but no one will use it because it won't actually achieve the purpose that they need it for. It'll sit on the show lot, and it'll be a nice piece to look at. Doesn't bring value to anybody. PKI, the industry in which we work in, is a natural example of this framework. We actually just need to deploy what's already there. Focus on the technology, but also the policy and procedures are just important. Also understanding who the beneficiaries are and what is seeking to be accomplished by the community that you're enabling has to be taken into account in everything that you're deploying. So, technology is a key part of success in the information age, but it's not the only thing. So many times I have seen folks who think they're deploying PKI, and as I said before, they just deployed PKT. They bought something, they plugged it in, and they think they got the benefits. And they didn't, because the technology is just one piece. They didn't manage it appropriately, and then somebody else was able to subvert that and use it against them, or to use it for unintended purposes, which created an element of distrust in their customers, and they went out of business. If technology is managed appropriately, and that's the key, it can actually achieve what it's intended to do. So I'm not sure how many of the rest of the talks are going to be focused a lot on the technology itself. I love PrimeKey. I love the technology that we've got from PrimeKey. It enables so much functionality and capabilities that is readily available for us just to configure. But the trick is, we actually have to do the configuration. I love the fact that I have maximum capabilities there, and there are some things when we first partnered with PrimeKey that are not there, that don't enable aspects of our business that are necessary for workflow to occur to achieve the benefits that we want. And so we've been working with PrimeKey to achieve these things. And as the product evolves, we have more and more tools to enable other aspects of PKI. The other aspects that aren't necessarily just technology focused, they're actually the business process focused, which are just as important. So those policies and procedures are important, and then understanding those relationships. And again, the key relationships are the people. They're the people in your teams that you're working with. They're the customers that you're working for. It's those that are going to benefit from the technology at the end of the day. All of these and their perspectives need to be taken into account, and you need to determine how you're going to measure your success. If you do that, then this technology that many of us love, I love PKI, I love crypto, but it's only going to be as good as the benefits it can deliver. And it can only deliver the benefits if we take those other aspects into account. And that really is the core of my message today. As we work with the technology, consider those other pieces. They are just as important. They are often, in fact, most of the time, the things that fail or means that a venture, a business opportunity, a set of services fail. It's not because the technology didn't work. The technology is solid. It's the way in which it was implemented. It's the way in which it's managed. And that is the true art to deploying a trust center. You know, a trust center is a place where you have a set of technology installed and it operates and is audited to perform a certain set of services. As we're deploying those, technology is key, but it's all the other things that really matter the most. And with that, I'm open for any questions that people might have. Wow, stunned everybody into silence. Well, as I said, I really intend this to be the start of a conversation with many of you. Yes?
Could you just elaborate a little bit more on this attitude you were discussing earlier?
Yeah. So, one of the profiles that typically gets associated with the IT industry, for instance, is that a lot of folks who work in the IT industry may be fairly driven, very smart individuals, but maybe they don't relate socially so well with others. And you can't necessarily ignore that fact when you're building a team, because a team is really about getting the best benefits out of everybody and allowing people to operate in an environment in which they're comfortable so that they actually maximize what they actually produce. Now, there are only so many places where you can take somebody who doesn't like to interact socially, for instance, and allow them to contribute to an organization. At some point, there has to be interactions with the rest of the team. So, when you're looking for somebody, and if all points were equal, you know, this person has this experience with this technology, they've got this experience deploying these types of systems, etc. And you had two candidates who met that criteria, and this individual is more suited to working in a team, and this individual has not demonstrated that they're suited to working in a team, then this would be the better hire to make if you're deploying a team environment. You're not always deploying a team environment. The other thing that you also need to take into account is, you know what, maybe they're close, but this person's slightly better. If you decide that you want to leverage that individual for the skills that they have, for the immediate benefits that they can bring to the team, you actually have to be prepared to manage the individual. Right? So there's actually a cost to doing that, and you have to cater for that as you're preparing to deploy a system. At the end of the day, we're all people, we're all operating as part of that, and we need to do so in a way that is harmonious, because if you've got too much conflict going on in the teams that you're deploying, it will impact your ability to deploy. So that's an example of what I was talking about.
What use cases are implemented in the US?
The what, sorry?
What use cases?
So use cases is a whole other thing. We have a mandate to enable the PKI for a number of things. Number one, the government wanted to ensure that all the government services and all the government-to-government services were implemented on a common and standard platform. So there are transactions that occur government to government, there are transactions that occur business to government, and there's transactions that occur consumer to government. And they are really looking to enable a lot more consumer to government, consumer to business services on a platform that can be trusted. So what does that mean? So right now within the UAE, they have already a national PKI, if you like, that's deployed. It's an identity PKI. Everybody carries a smart card in their pocket. There is a private PKI, private certificate and key on that card that identifies them. But there are probably about 300 places in the whole of UAE where they can be used easily. So great technology, nothing wrong with the PKI, but somebody didn't really think through the deployment and how you actually reach the individuals. So one of the things that we will be deploying, or in the process of deploying, is for some use cases, you do want the absolute assurance. So with the national ID card for certain transactions, which is like individual to government, they want to know that that is that individual. There's a biometric, you have to fingerprint test on the card to make sure this is the owner of the card, et cetera, et cetera. But then there are a whole range of other services that they want to be enabled. For instance, to go to a digital economy, you want to take anything that might have a physical implementation and get away from all the paper processes, move them all online and allow digital signature. So everybody in the UAE, you're not really a resident of the UAE unless you have a couple of these phones in your pocket. And so we are utilising the mobile interface as a way of providing digital signatures, providing prioritized access to data services, etc., automatic log on for at the desktop, etc. And when you have a deployment of identity credentials that allows that, it enables a whole bunch of services. So deploying those identity services are some of the use cases, right? So, and they're an enhancement of the existing smart card-based use cases. So making them available from a mobile perspective. Also being able to do things online. Right now, there's still a lot of places where you have to actually go and show up in person and do stuff. We can get rid of all that and do everything online and enable business to occur online when we have reliable credentials representing individuals available to them in a format that's trustable. And so document signing, obviously. Enabling secure communications, so secure from point A to point B, whether that's email or messaging. Enabling, again, even just in the local community within the UAE, and actually the GCC area, enabling and setting standards for, I know there's a couple of CA folks here as well, you know, we have global standards for CAs, also ensuring that everybody is meeting those standards as well. So we have perhaps higher levels that we need to agree to operate under in order to ensure that for the businesses that operate out of the UAE, they actually have a higher level of assurance in doing business. And this is very deliberate by the government, because they recognize that in the UAE, if you take a look at how the rest of the world is under attack versus how the UAE is under attack, UAE is actually under a little bit higher level of attack, statistically speaking, than the rest of the world. And that is typically because systems that are in place are not as up to date as they need to be, or that the expertise to support the systems that have been deployed is not readily available in the community. It's actually part of the reason why DarkMatter exists. It was to create some place where these services are available locally and can be provided. So in doing that, you know, providing or creating an environment where trust exists across all of these use cases are all being sought to be enabled by the PKI. Yes?
How is DarkMatter responding to blockchain? So UAE's, has a public strategy where to be a blockchain leader, and one might think that might be possibly competitive traditional trust model offered by DarkMatter. So competition, new business.
So DarkMatter actually has an R&D, or a lot of R&D actually. And we actually have I shouldn't say a whole division, but we have a whole group that is focused on blockchain. DarkMatter has produced a set of APIs that allows for PKI integration, 3 different types of PKI to be combined, one for identity, one for authorization, and federation to occur, so that it makes it fairly easy to deploy blockchain services based on the PKI services that we also have. There are a number of working groups for looking at different models for deploying blockchain that work on a global basis that DarkMatter is participating in. And then you have Dubai seeking to be, smartest city in the world, who are looking to deploy everything on blockchain by 2020. And so we are engaged in a lot of places with the Emirate of Dubai in how is the best way to do that with blockchain, and what methods do you, and which technology do you use? Because there are options out there. And although I think it's probably fair to say at this point that the expertise within DarkMatter is probably focused on one flavor of that, DarkMatter is really tries to be as technology agnostic as possible to be more of a trusted partner to help somebody who wants and has a preference for deploying a certain technology to be able to do so. So we have specialists in the blockchain area, and we do have actually a lot of initiatives that actually are going on that we're involved in. I'm not sure that I'm at liberty to say more than that. I hope that answers your question. Anything else? Well, I want to thank you for listening to me drone on for a while. As I said, I intended this to be the start of a conversation. I'm actually happy to hear from you, want to engage with you. I don't believe that any one individual has all knowledge, has all the best answers. It actually takes a collective effort to succeed, because we actually have entities who are working collectively against us. And so we all need to work together to be successful. And I invite you to the dance. I invite you to participate with me. I'm happy to participate with you and lend whatever knowledge, experience, expertise I may have gained, and to hopefully help us all provide services that are trustworthy and actually achieve the benefits that we expect. So, thank you.